I'm Yvonne, 58 years old, and I thought I knew what heartbreak felt like until my husband of 27 years chose our daughter's wedding day to destroy everything I believed about our life together. That beautiful spring morning started like any other celebration, but by evening, I discovered that sometimes the most devastating betrayal can become your greatest liberation. What happened during the father-daughter dance changed everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and who really held the power in our marriage. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you're watching from, and please hit that like button and subscribe. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this story ends because sometimes the worst betrayal leads to the greatest freedom. Now let me take you back to that morning when I still believed in forever. The alarm rang at 5:30 that Saturday morning, but I was already awake staring at the ceiling with that mix of excitement and anxiety that only comes with monumental days. Sarah's wedding day had finally arrived after 8 months of meticulous planning, and every detail had to be perfect. I slipped quietly out of bed, careful not to wake Richard, though he seemed unusually restless, tossing and turning all night. I padded downstairs to our kitchen, the same kitchen where Richard and I had shared countless morning coffees over the years, discussing everything from his dental practice expansion to Sarah's college choices. The early morning light filtered through the bay window, illuminating the organized chaos of wedding preparations. Gift bags lined the counter, final vendor confirmations were neatly stacked beside my planner, and Sarah's something borrowed, something blue items waited in their designated basket. For 27 years, I had been the foundation that held our family together. While Richard focused on building his successful dental practice in downtown Portland, I managed every aspect of our household finances, coordinated our social calendar, and created the warm, stable home environment that allowed both him and Sarah to thrive. I took pride in my role as the behind-the-scenes orchestrator, the one who made everything look effortless, while handling the complex logistics of our comfortable upper-middle-class life. I had spent decades supporting Richard's professional ambitions, often sacrificing my own career aspirations to ensure his success. When he needed capital to expand the practice, I provided it. When he wanted to join the country club to network with potential clients, I organized the membership process. When Sarah needed help with college applications, I researched schools and coordinated visits while Richard maintained his busy patient schedule. The morning unfolded with the familiar rhythm of pre-event preparation. I coordinated with the florist, confirmed transportation schedules, and fielded excited calls from out-of-town relatives. Sarah arrived at 10 with her bridal party transforming our master bedroom into a bustling salon filled with laughter, champagne, and the sweet chaos of women preparing for a celebration. Yet something felt different about Richard that morning. He moved through the house like a stranger, checking his phone obsessively and avoiding the warm, conspiratorial glances we usually shared during the family celebrations. When I tried to steal a quiet moment with him during the makeup session, he claimed urgent patient calls demanded his attention. His behavior struck me as odd, but I attributed it to father of the bride nerves and focused on ensuring Sarah's day remained magical. The ceremony took place at the historic Pittock Mansion, overlooking the Portland skyline, with Mount Hood majestic in the distance. Sarah looked radiant in her grandmother's vintage lace dress, which I had carefully preserved and altered to fit her perfectly. Richard walked her down the aisle with apparent pride, though I noticed his smile seemed forced, his movements mechanical rather than joyful. As I watched our daughter exchange vows with David, her college sweetheart, who had become like a son to us, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from creating something beautiful and lasting. This wedding represented the culmination of years of love, sacrifice, and careful planning. I believed Richard and I were witnessing the continuation of a family legacy built on commitment, trust, and shared values. The reception began at the elegant Sentinel Hotel ballroom, where I had spent weeks coordinating every detail, from the centerpieces featuring Sarah's favorite peonies to the carefully curated playlist spanning 3 generations of family favorites. As guests mingled during cocktail hour, I moved seamlessly between conversations, ensuring everyone felt welcome while keeping a watchful eye on the evening's timeline. But Richard's behavior became increasingly peculiar. Instead of standing beside me to greet guests as we had at countless social events over the years, he positioned himself across the room, engaging in hushed conversations with unexpected companions. I watched him huddle with Linda, his dental hygienist, discussing something that required intense concentration and frequent glances in my direction. Linda was 28, blonde, and recently divorced, someone I had always treated with professional courtesy during my occasional visits to Richard's office. Seeing them in deep conversation at our daughter's wedding struck me as inappropriate, but I pushed the observation aside, unwilling to let suspicion taint this precious day. The wedding photographer, whom I had carefully selected after reviewing dozens of portfolios, approached us for traditional family portraits. Richard insisted on individual shots rather than the couple photos we had discussed, claiming he looked better alone. When I suggested we recreate our own wedding pose for a romantic touch, he dismissed the idea with unusual curtness, muttering about maintaining focus on the bride and groom. During dinner, I sat beside my sister Margaret, who had flown in from Phoenix specifically for Sarah's wedding. Margaret had always been perceptive about relationship dynamics, having survived her own divorce 15 years earlier. She leaned over during the salad course and whispered, "Richard seems different tonight, more confident, like he's made some kind of decision." Her observation sent an uncomfortable chill through me. Richard did appear unusually self-assured, almost cocky, as he moved through the reception. He avoided our usual intimate glances and inside jokes, instead treating me with polite distance typically reserved for acquaintances. When our longtime friend James approached to congratulate us on raising such a wonderful daughter, Richard accepted the praise without including me in the conversation. The financial irregularities I had noticed the previous week suddenly gained new significance. Our business checking account had shown unusual activity, including several transfers I hadn't initiated and a consultation fee paid to a law firm I didn't recognize. When I questioned Richard about these transactions, he dismissed them as routine business expenses and suggested I was becoming overly controlling about money management. Richard's mother, usually effusive in her praise of family gatherings I organized, made a cryptic comment during the cocktail reception. "Richard seems to have found new energy lately," she said, studying my face carefully. "He's been talking about making significant life changes. I hope you're prepared for whatever comes next, dear." Despite these mounting concerns, I forced myself to focus on Sarah's happiness. This was her day, the culmination of months of planning and years of dreams. Whatever issues Richard and I might need to address could wait until after our daughter began her honeymoon. I pushed down the growing unease and concentrated on being the gracious hostess, the supportive mother, the devoted wife I had always been. The father-daughter dance began with Frank Sinatra's "The Way You Look Tonight," a song Richard had sung to Sarah as a lullaby when she was small. As I watched them move gracefully across the dance floor, I expected to feel the warm pride that comes from witnessing such tender moments. Instead, something cold settled in my stomach as I observed Richard's expression. He appeared emotional, but his tears seemed wrung somehow more like relief than sentiment. His body language suggested finality rather than celebration, as if he were saying goodbye rather than sharing a precious memory. When the dance ended and Sarah kissed his cheek, he held her unusually long, whispering something that made her step back with confusion. Richard immediately sought me out, his face set with grim determination. "We need to talk privately," he said, gripping my elbow with unexpected firmness. "Right now." He guided me through the ballroom's French doors onto the hotel's garden terrace, away from the celebration's warmth and laughter. The May evening air felt suddenly cold against my bare shoulders, and the festive music became muffled background noise to whatever conversation Richard deemed urgent enough to interrupt our daughter's reception. "I've been waiting for the right moment," he began, his voice carrying an unfamiliar edge of authority. "I didn't want to ruin Sarah's wedding, but I can't pretend anymore." The words that followed hit me like physical blows, each sentence more devastating than the last. Richard announced his intention to leave our marriage, revealing a 6-month affair with Linda that had progressed to serious relationship plans. He spoke with the confidence of someone who had thoroughly planned this moment, consulting lawyers and organizing his post-divorce life, while I remained completely unaware. "I've found what I should have had all along," he continued, apparently oblivious to my shock. "Linda understands my needs, supports my ambitions, without trying to control everything. She makes me feel alive again." The cruelty of his timing struck me as deeply as his betrayal. He had calculated this announcement to follow our daughter's wedding, ensuring I couldn't create a scene or seek support from family and friends during the celebration. He had used my devotion to Sarah's happiness as a weapon against me, knowing I would suffer in silence rather than destroy her special day. Richard outlined his expectations with businesslike efficiency. He anticipated keeping the dental practice he had built, maintaining ownership of our family home, and retaining the majority of assets accumulated during our marriage. His tone suggested these arrangements were foregone conclusions rather than negotiations, as if my 27 years of contribution and sacrifice were irrelevant details. "I'll be moving out next week," he concluded. "My lawyer will contact you about the divorce proceedings. I hope we can handle this maturely for Sarah's sake." With that devastating announcement delivered, Richard straightened his tie and returned to the reception, leaving me alone on the terrace to process the complete destruction of everything I had believed about my life, my marriage, and my future. Standing alone in that hotel garden, surrounded by the distant sounds of celebration, I experienced a moment of clarity that cut through the shock and pain like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Richard's confident assumption that he held all the power in our marriage revealed how little attention he had paid to the financial foundation I had carefully constructed over nearly 3 decades. While he focused on building his dental practice and expanding his professional reputation, I had managed every aspect of our family's financial security with meticulous attention to detail. What Richard didn't realize, despite my numerous attempts to discuss our finances over the years, was that his successful practice existed largely because of my strategic planning and capital investment. 8 years earlier, when Richard wanted to expand his practice and add cosmetic dentistry services, the bank had approved our loan application based primarily on my credit score and my family inheritance as collateral. To streamline the paperwork and take advantage of my superior financial standing, we had structured the practice ownership with me holding 60% equity. Richard had signed the documents without reading them carefully, trusting me to handle the boring business details while he focused on patient care. Our family home, purchased 12 years ago in one of Portland's most desirable neighborhoods, was titled exclusively in my name. Richard's credit had been compromised by some impulsive investments early in his career, so we had used my pristine financial history and a significant down payment from my grandmother's estate to secure the mortgage. Again, Richard had been content to let me manage the transaction, assuming his name was automatically included in the ownership. The investment portfolio that Richard often mentioned proudly to friends and colleagues existed entirely because of my careful financial planning and market research. I had spent years studying investment strategies, diversifying our assets, and building wealth through methodical saving and strategic allocation. Richard contributed his income to our joint accounts, but I managed every investment decision and legal arrangement. Over the years, as my financial management skills proved consistently successful, I had gradually moved more assets into my individual control to optimize our tax advantages and legal protections. Richard, trusting completely in my expertise and seemingly uninterested in financial details, had cheerfully signed power of attorney documents and beneficiary designations without scrutiny. The irony of his confident betrayal struck me with almost amusing clarity. Richard believed he was leaving our marriage from a position of strength, anticipating that his professional success and male privilege would automatically entitle him to the life we had built together. He had no idea that his comfortable lifestyle, his thriving practice, and his social status all existed because of my financial foundation and strategic planning. I realized that Richard's affair with Linda had probably been encouraged by his assumption that he could easily afford to support a younger woman while maintaining his current standard of living. He likely envisioned leaving our marriage with minimal financial consequences, perhaps even feeling generous about providing me with some settlement from his assets. As I stood in that garden watching our daughter's wedding reception continue inside, I made a calculated decision. I would say nothing tonight, allowing Richard to enjoy his sense of superiority while I planned my response carefully and strategically, the same way I had managed every other important aspect of our family's life. The morning after Sarah's wedding, Richard moved through our house with the confidence of someone who believed victory was assured. He packed his belongings efficiently, whistling softly as he selected his favorite artworks and personal items. When I appeared in the kitchen for coffee, he offered a patronizing smile and suggested I should start considering my options for downsizing and restructuring my life. "I want this to be as easy as possible for both of us," he said, as if his betrayal were a minor inconvenience we could resolve through reasonable discussion. "Linda and I are looking at condos downtown closer to the practice. You might want to think about something smaller, maybe one of those senior communities with activities and support services." His assumption that I would need guidance and assistance in rebuilding my life revealed how completely he had underestimated my capabilities and independence. Richard apparently believed that 27 years of marriage had left me helpless and dependent, unable to function without his direction and financial support. After Richard left for his temporary apartment, I began implementing the strategic response I had developed during my sleepless night. My first call went to Patricia Coleman, the family law attorney who had handled my sister's divorce with impressive thoroughness and favorable results. Patricia agreed to see me immediately, recognizing the urgency of protecting my assets before Richard's legal team could act. My second call went to our longtime accountant, Harold Kim, who had worked with us for 15 years and understood the complex structure of our financial holdings. Harold expressed surprise at the divorce news, but assured me that our records clearly established my ownership position in all major assets. The third call went to James Morrison, Richard's business partner, who owned 25% of the dental practice and served as our practice administrator. James had always maintained a strictly professional relationship with me, but he was genuinely shocked to learn about Richard's affair and divorce plans. More importantly, he confirmed that Richard had never bothered to understand the practice's ownership structure or financial obligations. By noon, I had taken decisive action to protect my financial interests and secure my legal position. Patricia immediately filed motions to freeze all business accounts and prevent asset transfers until the court could review our case. She also prepared documentation establishing my primary ownership of the dental practice and our home. Richard's first indication that his plans might encounter obstacles came when he attempted to access the practice's main checking account to pay Linda's moving expenses. The bank informed him that the account had been frozen pending legal proceedings, and he would need written authorization from the primary account holder, me, for any transactions. The phone call I received 20 minutes later revealed a Richard I had never heard before. Gone was the confident, patronizing tone he had used that morning. Instead, I heard panic, confusion, and the beginning of genuine fear. "What did you do, Yvonne?" he demanded. "The bank says I can't access my own business accounts. This is ridiculous. I built that practice." "Actually, Richard," I replied calmly, "if you had ever bothered to read the documents you signed, you would know that I own 60% of the practice and serve as the primary account holder. I'm simply protecting our assets during divorce proceedings." The silence that followed lasted so long, I wondered if the call had dropped. When Richard finally spoke, his voice had risen to a pitch I found almost amusing. "That's impossible. I'm the dentist. I see the patients. It's my practice. Your name is on the door, but my name is on the deed, the business license, and the bank accounts. Perhaps you should consult with your attorney about the legal realities of our situation." By 3 o'clock that afternoon, Richard had discovered the full extent of his financial miscalculations, and his response could be heard throughout our neighborhood. He stormed back to our house, abandoning all pretense of civilized discussion in favor of screaming accusations and desperate demands. "You manipulated me," he shouted, standing in our foyer like an enraged stranger. You tricked me into signing those papers. I trusted you, and you used that against me. Linda accompanied him, her face pale with the realization that her romantic conquest was rapidly transforming into a financial disaster. She remained by the door, clearly uncomfortable with the deteriorating situation and perhaps beginning to question her choice of partners. I remained seated at our dining room table, surrounded by the legal documents that clearly established my ownership of virtually everything Richard had assumed belonged to him. Patricia had organized the paperwork, meticulously creating an undeniable paper trail of my financial contributions and legal ownership. I didn't manipulate anything, Richard, I replied evenly. I managed our finances responsibly while you focused on your practice. Every document you signed was legitimate, and I explained the arrangements multiple times over the years. You chose not to pay attention. Richard's fury intensified as I calmly explained each financial reality he had ignored. The house was mine because I had purchased it with my inheritance and excellent credit. The practice was primarily mine because I had provided the capital and collateral for expansion. The investment accounts were mine because I had built them through years of careful planning and strategic allocation. You can't do this, he screamed, his face red with rage and disbelief. I'm a successful professional. I have patients who depend on me. You can't just steal my life's work. I'm not stealing anything, I corrected. I'm claiming what legally belongs to me. You made a choice to betray our marriage, and now you're discovering the consequences of that choice. Linda finally spoke up, her voice small and uncertain. Richard, maybe we should reconsider this whole situation. I didn't realize things were so complicated. Richard turned on her with vicious desperation. Don't you dare abandon me now. This is temporary. I'll fight this. I'll prove she manipulated the situation. But Linda was already backing toward the door, clearly recognizing that her dreams of a comfortable life with a successful dentist had evaporated along with Richard's assumed wealth and security. James Morrison arrived shortly after having received frantic calls from Richard demanding explanations about the practice ownership. As a minority partner, James had always deferred to my financial management and Richard's clinical expertise. Now he found himself in the awkward position of confirming that Richard had never held controlling interest in the business. I'm sorry, Richard, James said uncomfortably, but Yvonne has always been the majority owner. She invested the expansion capital, she guaranteed the loans, and she manages all the financial operations. I assumed you understood the arrangement. Richard's world continued crumbling as each assumption proved false. His confident plans for post-divorce prosperity had been based on complete misunderstanding of his actual financial position. The successful life he had planned to share with Linda existed only because of my behind-the-scenes management and ownership. Over the following weeks, Richard's situation deteriorated with the relentless efficiency of a carefully constructed plan finally reaching its inevitable conclusion. The legal proceedings moved forward with Patricia's characteristic thoroughness, each step revealing another layer of Richard's financial dependency and my strategic ownership. The dental practice, without access to its main operating accounts and facing questions about ownership legitimacy, began experiencing operational difficulties. Patients started canceling appointments as word spread through our social network about Richard's personal troubles. Staff members, uncertain about their job security and uncomfortable with the affair scandal, began seeking other employment opportunities. Richard was forced to move from his temporary apartment to an even smaller space when he couldn't afford the rent without access to practice income. Linda had indeed reconsidered their relationship, apparently deciding that love without financial security wasn't sufficient for her needs. She returned to working at the practice, but maintained strictly professional distance from Richard. Our daughter Sarah, initially devastated by the timing of her parents' separation, gradually understood the full scope of her father's betrayal after several long conversations with me. She was particularly hurt by Richard's decision to announce his affair immediately following her wedding, viewing it as a selfish disregard for her happiness and our family celebration. Margaret extended her visit to provide emotional support during the most challenging weeks of legal proceedings. Having survived her own divorce, she offered practical advice about rebuilding identity and confidence after marital betrayal. Her presence reminded me that I had a support network beyond my marriage relationships I had maintained, despite Richard's tendency to monopolize my time and attention. The divorce settlement negotiations revealed the full extent of Richard's financial miscalculations. His legal team, initially confident about securing favorable terms for their successful professional client, found themselves in the uncomfortable position of explaining why their client had virtually no assets to claim. Richard's lawyer actually suggested he consider accepting a minimal settlement rather than pursuing expensive litigation he couldn't afford. Community reaction was swift and decisive. Portland's dental community, always sensitive to professional scandals, began distancing themselves from Richard as details about his affair and financial irresponsibility became known. Several referral relationships ended abruptly when colleagues learned about his unprofessional behavior. The country club where Richard had enjoyed networking and socializing for over a decade became uncomfortable territory as friends and business associates struggled with divided loyalties. Many of our social connections, particularly, the women rallied around me with surprising warmth and support. Richard's desperate attempts to negotiate reconciliation were met with firm rejection. He offered to end his relationship with Linda, promised to attend counseling, and suggested we could rebuild our marriage stronger than before. But his proposals felt manipulative, rather than sincere, motivated by financial necessity, rather than genuine remorse or love. The final divorce decree awarded me full ownership of assets I had always legally controlled, plus reasonable compensation for Richard's minority share in the dental practice. Richard retained his professional credentials and the right to continue practicing, but under financial arrangements that reflected his actual contribution rather than his assumed ownership. 6 months after Sarah's wedding, I stood in the renovated kitchen of my home, the same space where I had started that devastating day, believing in the permanence of my marriage and family structure. The morning light still filtered through the bay window, but everything else about my life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined. The healing process had been neither quick nor simple, requiring honest confrontation with years of subtle manipulation and gradual erosion of my independence. Through therapy sessions with Dr. Rachel Barnes, a counselor who specialized in recovery from narcissistic relationships, I began recognizing patterns of behavior I had rationalized or ignored throughout my marriage. I discovered that Richard's apparent confidence in financial matters had been largely bluster masking his genuine ignorance about money management and investment strategy. His dismissive attitude toward my contributions hadn't reflected superior knowledge, but rather insecurity about his own limitations. For years, I had enabled his illusions while diminishing my own accomplishments and expertise. The dental practice, restructured under new management principles that recognized my ownership role, began thriving in ways it never had under Richard's sole direction. James and I developed an efficient partnership that balanced clinical excellence with sound business practices. We hired additional staff, expanded services, and created a more professional workplace culture. My relationship with Sarah deepened as we navigated this difficult transition together. She initially struggled with conflicting loyalties and confusion about her father's character, but gradually came to understand that loving someone doesn't require accepting their harmful behavior. Our weekly coffee dates became opportunities for honest conversations about relationships, boundaries, and self-respect. Margaret's extended visit had evolved into a permanent relocation to Portland. She found an apartment nearby and began building her own new life, providing companionship and support while respecting my need for independence. Having a trusted family member close by eased the loneliness of rebuilding social connections outside the couples-oriented activities that had dominated my married life. I rekindled friendships that had been neglected during years of focusing exclusively on Richard's needs and preferences. Women I had known through volunteer work, professional associations, and neighborhood connections welcomed me back with warmth and understanding. Many shared their own stories of marriages that had gradually diminished their sense of individual identity and worth. New interests emerged as I explored activities Richard had dismissed as boring or impractical. I enrolled in investment courses, joined a book club focused on women's literature, and began traveling to places that had always intrigued me but never fit Richard's vacation preferences. Each new experience reinforced my growing sense of personal autonomy and capability. The financial security I had always provided for others finally served my own dreams and aspirations. I established a scholarship fund for young women pursuing business education, invested in local women-owned businesses, and began planning travel adventures that reflected my interests rather than compromises with someone else's agenda. Most importantly, I learned to distinguish between partnership and dependency, between love and control, between supporting someone and losing myself in their needs. The woman who had stood in that hotel garden, accepting devastating betrayal, was not the same woman who now greeted each morning with anticipation rather than anxiety. I realized that Richard's affair, while painful and destructive, had actually freed me from a relationship that had gradually eroded my sense of individual worth and capability. His betrayal revealed truths about our marriage that I had been too loyal or too fearful to acknowledge, forcing me to reclaim strengths I had surrendered over decades of enabling his illusions. The greatest lesson emerged gradually through quiet moments of reflection and honest conversation with trusted friends. I learned that sometimes the worst betrayal becomes the catalyst for discovering who you really are when you stop defining yourself through someone else's needs and expectations. The pain of abandonment transformed into gratitude for liberation. When people ask how I survived such devastating betrayal, I tell them the truth. I didn't just survive. I discovered that I had never needed saving in the first place. I had always possessed the strength, wisdom, and resources necessary for building a meaningful life. I simply had to stop giving those gifts away to someone who neither valued nor deserved them. Today, when I see couples celebrating anniversaries or milestone events, I don't feel bitter or cynical about love and marriage. Instead, I feel grateful for the hard-won wisdom that teaches the difference between relationships that nurture growth and those that demand diminishment. True partnership enhances both people without requiring either to disappear. The woman who walked into that garden broken by betrayal is not the same woman telling this story today. I learned that when someone shows you who they really are through their choices and actions, believing them the first time can be the greatest gift you give yourself. Sometimes the end of one story is really the beginning of a much better one. Have you ever discovered that a painful ending was actually a disguised blessing that led to a better life? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your story might inspire someone else who's facing their own difficult transition. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences about finding strength in unexpected places. And don't forget to share this video with someone who might need to hear that they're stronger than they know. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember that your worth was never determined by someone else's ability to recognize it. May you find the courage to claim the life you truly deserve.